Good morning. My name is Rob Relier. I'm a program manager on the Windows Presentation Foundation team, the WPF team. I'm really excited to be here today to talk to you about some of the fundamentals of WPF. Now, you've probably seen a bunch of sessions already this week that have led you through bits and pieces of this. I'm going to try to walk you through most of the great content families and the great capabilities that WPF has for content: 2D, text, flow, 3D, etc. So I'm going to walk you through those things. This is a part one of part two. They're not closely intertwined. That was just our marketing bit. But actually, they fit together rather nicely. The second talk, Kevin Moore is going to give right after this in the same room. And he's going to be diving into a bunch of things deeper, how the developer can extend the system. Building custom panels, custom controls, data models, a bunch of great things. All of the content can be found for this at robrelier.com/events/MIX07. I've got a bunch of links there that I reference from my slides throughout. I'll be updating that over time. So feel free to go there. My blog is on Spaces. So it's challenging to describe something so descriptive like WPF. The way I like to do it is say you can build great applications that run on the Windows desktop and take advantage of that desktop. It can also run on Windows in the browser. Today that means IE6 on XP or later, or IE7 as well. And we recently announced, not too publicly, it got out on Ryan Stewart's blog, but we meant it to be. We recently announced that Firefox would also be a supported browser on Windows for WPF applications in the .NET Framework 3.5 timeframe. So our next release, coming in sync with the Orcus release, will have Firefox support in the browser as well. So you're able to build great-looking applications, great user experiences, and have those run on the desktop or in the browser on Windows. We're a really deep platform. You can start with 2D with the shapes. You can go to 3D. And in each of those areas, there's a lot of extensibility. Beyond that, we're part of the .NET Framework, which means all of the components of the .NET Framework are there, which is both a good and a bad one, as you'll see my asterisk in a moment. But we're a very deep platform. We've got a lot of different content that we can display and a lot of great functionality. And we've integrated those capabilities together very nicely. Animations, data binding, those kind of things work inside of UI space as well as vector graphics as well as 3D. You learn the technology once, you're able to leverage that over time. So the last point about WPF is that the applications are really simple to run. We take advantage of click once and will, for browser-based applications, not even require a prompt. You'll navigate to a link, the application will run, it's running in a sandbox, very easy to run for the user. Now, the asterisk comes from the very first application you have to run is tougher to deploy than most others. And that's because it requires the .NET Framework installed on the client, regardless of whether you're running in the browser or desktop. So those are my three key points about what WPF is. Now, I want to walk through some content families. Really, WPF was built so that we could integrate all of these content families. We had people who started the WPF team. They came from the Windows team, building Windows UI for years. They came from the DHTML team, that's where I came from. And they had great document support, great flow support in DHTML. And in Windows, they had great controls, great flexibility, great power. But it was really, Win32 was hard to achieve it wasn't a very achievable API for many. So we wanted to pull these different families together. I'm going to step through many of these real quickly right now and tell you which ones I'm going to dive in a little bit later. So panels are a layout concept in WPF. Panels are elements that effectively pull in all the other different content families, and they're your canvas, your palette, and allow you to describe what's on the left, what's on the right, what's on the bottom, how do my items wrap, etc. I'll be diving into some samples there. 2D vector graphics, both WPF and Silverlight have a shared set of 2D vector graphics. So we'll walk through those shapes and we'll learn a little bit about them. Now, we have 3D. I kind of crossed it off here because I'm not going to go deeply into 3D. I'll do a quick demo of 3D. There's actually a concurrent session, I believe, that's going in deeply, that you should catch on video. It's going deeply into a building of a great 3D visualization control that was built by the Microsoft Dynamics team. So be sure to check that out, and I'll link to that afterwards on my site. So with that, let me pop over to an application that the Scripps Research Institute put together to help their cancer researchers analyze and fight cancer collaboratively. So this is a 3D model. So WPF over here, you've got a normal menu and some normal vector graphics down here. You're able to integrate these things together. WPF has a control called Viewport 3D, which you place on a 2D surface, and then inside of there, you describe a bunch of models and cameras and lights and things like that. And tools, you can import this content from a lot of different 3D tools. But then you can go beyond and really do a lot of interactivity with the content as well. If I shift click and drag, I can expand some of those things and drill in with my mouse. And the real application that this company built also allows you to go annotate different parts of the molecule. So you can right-click on it, annotate it. I believe it saves the data up to a SharePoint site, and then everybody else who's working on the same molecule is able to share that same information. So 3D, we've got lots of great data visualization capabilities. That's clearly a great scenario for 3D. There'll be many other good scenarios for 3D as well. Now, Kevin Moore is going to go deep into controls. He'll show you how we've got basically skinless controls. These controls don't really have a rendering built in and hard-coded, and he'll show you how you can use styles and templating to change the look of these controls. He'll also show you a great couple controls that he's built. He's got a bag of tricks that he's been adding to over the years, and he'll show you some of the highlights from those pieces. Now, input is critically important. We've got great text input, both with a text box and a rich text box, and including things like spell checking. We'll do a little bit of that here. And we also have fantastic ink support. Our controls are all natively supported for ink, and then we also have a great entry point into the system for ink by using the ink canvas control. The ink canvas control allows you to use your stylus or your mouse and draw and interact with content. We have a namespace called system.windows.imaging, which allows you to not only display images, but also has a rich set of codecs. It's an extensible set of codecs, and you can read and create bitmaps. In fact, later today, I'll show you a creation of a ping file from my vector graphics. So I'll take you through a little bit of that. Maybe I shouldn't have slashed it off totally. Now, this week has clearly been focused on a lot of great media capabilities inside of Silverlight. And all of the content that runs inside of Silverlight can also run inside of WPF applications, but then you also get the benefits of some additional services here. So basically, we have a media element, just like Silverlight. I'll be diving into some of the basics of text with the text block control, and we'll also be diving into documents. We'll dive into flow documents and fixed documents. That gives us an idea of what we're going to go ahead and do. So let's start with 2D graphics. In 2D graphics, there's a lot of different places you can get content. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start with Expression. Expression has a tool called Design, which is meant to draw vectors, draw assets, create assets. How many of you are designers here, actually? Okay. This is targeted towards developers, but I think designers should see a lot of benefit in this session as well. So I'll launch Design. Design, you all have this. Just shipped this week. Very excited to see that. So I'll quickly make a vector art here. I'll create a new document. And I'll use the tools over here. I'll use a rectangle tool. I'll right-click and use an ellipse. And then I'll also use a pen. With this pen, I'm drawing a path, and it's covered everything over. I'll modify the fill to, to be null, and I'll quickly just modify these guys' color as well. So if you're a better designer than me, you can do much more than just that. There we go. I'll press Control A. I'll copy the XAML. And let's first go take that into XAMLpad. Now, XAML is an XML language that I like to refer to as similar to C# and VB. C# and VB can create objects. XAML creates trees of objects. So here I have a page tag in this XAML document. And this page file is part of the 2006 XAML presentation namespace. This is where most of our functionality is available. I'll paste this in. I pressed the bad key. I'll create a canvas and then paste my content right in. And there we go. We see we have a path, an ellipse, and a path. One thing you'll notice when you play with a lot of vector tools, a lot of them will dumb down a rectangle, say, and turn it into a path, so you're able to manipulate it in finer ways. We could also go ahead and just delete that. I deleted the right one. I'll put a rectangle in here. So in XAML, you use a tag. This tag will create an object called rectangle. It happens to come from the system.windows.shapes namespace. The rectangle, I will give it a fill color of blue, and I'll give it a height and a width. There we go. And I can also position it using an attached property called canvas.top and canvas.left. I'll describe that in 1 second. So I'll position that. Okay, I overshot. Okay. So with XAML, we have tags. These tags map to classes. So this is much like writing code in C# or VB or other languages saying new rectangle. I set the fill property to blue. Now, fill isn't a string, so we use type converters to go look for the brush that is blue. Height and width go through some type conversion as well, because you can also do things like 1 inch, and that will work. 1.5 inches, that changes. Now, canvas.top and canvas.left are interesting. Those are strange looking properties. Canvas.top and canvas.left are attached properties that the parent element is defining, and it decides he'll go harvest those things. The canvas knows how to lay things out, and the canvas will go harvest all the top properties, the left properties, and decide where to lay things out. We didn't want to make all those properties natively built into every element, because people have lots of ideas for panels. Canvas, carousel view, a lot of different things. The next thing I'm going to do is I want to change, I want to rotate this. Now, I'm flying blind here in XAMLpad. There are better tools for this. But I'm going to start by just using a tool called Type Explorer that I built, and I'll show you how to build different pieces of this, and eventually I'll release it on the web. So Type Explorer is kind of a XAML-centric reflector tool to understand class hierarchy and understand capabilities. So here I'm looking at panel. So panel's right here. Its superclass is framework element. And then all the way here, all these guys, these 9 elements, are the 9 different direct subclasses of the panel element inside of WPF. Excuse me. So we see that, excuse me. canvas has content that can be put inside of it. It has a property called, that effectively get put in the children property. Canvas has a children property, and inside of it, it can hold as many UI elements as you want. And then it's got attached properties that it offers up to its children to set, called left, top, right, bottom. And it doesn't have any other properties itself. Let's switch back over to XAMLpad. So what we were doing is we were setting the top property and the left property, and the canvas was figuring that out. Now we also have what I call these elements. This is an object element. That rectangle creates an object. This property, the transform property, actually it's the layout. One second. There's a layout transform property. There's also a render transform property if you don't want to affect layout. And let's go look at that. So if we see, if we walk up the class hierarchy, and I jump too far, let me go type UI element. UI element has a render transform and a layout transform. And those are of type transform. So I can go type in transform and see the class hierarchy there. Transform has a matrix transform, a rotate transform, a scale transform, skew transform, all these different things. And transform group holds more transforms. So I can, if I wanted to rotate and scale something, I would need to use the group and then group all those different transforms inside of there. That's a common pattern in a lot of our media things. So I'm going to use scale transform, rotate transform, and I'll set the angle property on it. So to create a rotate transform, I just type that, markup equals OM, angle equals 45. There we go. So that's a property element. I'm setting a property on the parent object with the child content. Now, the really nice thing about property elements is it gives you the power to use full declaration power of XML and nest things, etc. Otherwise, you have to go invent little languages that live inside of the strings. And that gets to be not very toolable, etc. Now, you can also do the same thing with brushes. And I'll just show you an example of that in a moment. So I'll copy and paste this content and go over into blend. Now, expression blend, also just shipping, is a great tool for taking a lot of these assets that were created in different places and I'm going to have to hand edit here in this paste scenario coming from XAMLpad. The one problem it has is demo-wise, the XAML editor doesn't scale up. So I apologize for this, and I'll try to stay out of the XAML in this world. So here we are now in expression blend. Blend is a tool that does interaction design, and it allows me to see hierarchies of elements. I can see over here in the left pane that this layer I had created, which was a canvas element, has a rectangle, an ellipse, and a path inside of it. I can right-click on things and do interesting things like group all of these elements into other panels. Like I'll group this into a view box right now. And now I have a view box which does arbitrary scaling, just like you saw a moment ago. There we go. Pardon me. So if we go, I'm just going to change one thing here. Pardon me. I'll go into the ellipse, and I'll go to the property pane. Now, Blend has a great property pane. You've probably already seen it. You can do things like search for things and search for alignment, and it will bring all the alignment properties together. So it's really, really helpful to use. One other great capability about it that you may not have seen yet is a lot of these properties have little dots next to them. These dots are really helpful. You click on them, and they show all the things you can do with a property. You can reset it so it has no value. you can assign a custom expression onto it. You can assign the value to a system resource that's shared, such as a system color. You could take the current value, this red brush, and convert it to a new resource so you can reuse it elsewhere. And you could also data bind the value of this brush to some other data source. So very powerful, and the Blend guys have done a fantastic job exposing some of that capabilities to the developer and designer. Now Cider, the Visual Studio Orcus, has a very similar property grid and uses a lot of the same functionality as well. So I'm going to change the fill here. I can go from solid color brush to a linear gradient brush. And now I've got a gradient stop bar down here on the bottom. And this is where it gets dangerous. Got to be careful, as you can see by some of my designs, about where you go with these gradients. So you can add a bunch of gradient stops, etc. So let's quickly go look at the class hierarchy for brush, and then I'll show you the markup for that just so you can understand the area a little bit. So brush, subclass is animatable, which subclass is freezable. Freezable and animatable are key concepts here. Pretty much everything is animatable in the system, data bindable, stylable, etc. Freezable is a base class which allows you to have sharing of things. So if you wanted to have one brush and share that instance across a bunch of different things, you could freeze it programmatically and use it everywhere and only pay one instance cost. So that's basically the concept behind freezable. So brush has a few descendants here: gradient brush, solid color brush, and tile brush. If I go into gradient brush, it's got linear gradient brush and radial gradient brush as subclasses. Now you notice that the linear gradient brush has a content property called gradient stops. Takes a bunch of gradient stops. So let's go look at the markup and see if we can guess what it might be. I'll read it out loud since many of you won't be able to see this, so I'll just paste it over here real fast. So we had linear gradient brush. It had an endpoint and a start point that controls which direction it goes, and it had a collection of gradient stops. Now this is exactly equivalent to saying, I'll do it in shorthand, linear gradient brush dot gradient stops with a property element. So whether or not you actually have a property element inside of an element, it doesn't matter. We look at the type and we look for a content property attribute, and we know that the gradient stops property is the one we use, and we'll stick all the children inside of that property. Okay. So we just saw some basic uses of shapes. The places you can get 2D content include XAML conversion tools like Design and Blend. There's a lot of converters and exporters from well-known formats. My event site has some links off to Mike Swanson's site that lists a bunch of different converters. And one of the great things you can do also is you can do programmatic creation of vectors. So you have your data, you want to visualize things. Much like I'm visualizing class hierarchy, you can programmatically create these things, you can data bind these things. There's a lot of great ways to go create those things. Now, Robbie Ingebrigtsen of Identity Mine went and did something really cool as well. So we have all these 6 different shapes: line and polyline and rectangle and ellipse, those kind of things. He wanted a more custom look to some of his shapes. So he built something called the hand-drawn shapes. And these hand-drawn shapes have properties like randomness, messiness, seed, scale to bounds, and all those things. And it's what I'm using. Excuse me. It's what I'm using over in this Type Explorer tool. If you notice, when I click on panel here, if I just keep clicking it, you see those rectangles all kind of redrawing, because every time it's just random. So it gives us this artsy look, and it's just one of the extensibility points that you can go do. Let's see how to go use one of those things. So here in Blend, actually, sorry, I haven't gotten the colors straight. Which one is Blend and which one is Design and which one is Web? Otherwise, they all look pretty much the same. So Blend does a really good job of making it so that you can include other people's controls in your work. I happen to just have the source code for hand-drawn shapes and tree map panel, 2 different components, and I dropped them into my project. And then inside of the toolbox over here, I can click on these arrows, choose custom controls, and I'll see things like hand-drawn ellipse and hand-drawn rectangle. I can now draw with that. Now, and then change the properties, etc. So I can change the stroke thickness. This is one of my favorite controls, actually. When you take a look at this control in Blend, you can click on it and drag up and down to change the values. Or you can double-click on it and type the text value. So that's the stroke thickness. And then we'll do messiness as well. We'll increase the messiness. We'll run this app. There we go. It drew five times, so it was a little bit of a messy control. So anyway, so those are some of the basic shapes we have. And you learned a little bit about brushes as well. What I'm not going to go into is visual brush and drawing brush. Visual brush is a very powerful brush. It's how you saw the puzzle demo in the keynote that had the video and split it up into a bunch of pieces. What you can do is you can take any visual in WPF and create a visual brush and point that visual brush over to any element, any visual. And then you can draw with that brush on another surface, on a 3D surface, on a bunch of different puzzle pieces, and you can go clip those things. And so it's a very powerful feature that can build those things. Drawing brush is another great thing. Drawing brush allows you to use these lower level primitives that does 2D as well. So shapes, 2D shapes are very 2D shapes are interactive and have events and properties, but they're pretty heavyweight for each thing. If you had a 10,000 vector piece of art, you don't want to use shapes for those things. You really only want to use them when you have to be interactive. So we have another technology called drawings, which have geometries, which you can use at a lower level, and then you can use a drawing brush if you'd like. I'd like to show you an interesting application. There's a bunch of applications that have been coming out for WPF where people have been building what I'm calling like situational visualization and control applications. They want to see live, real-time, where are the trains in the London Underground? Live, where are the planes at the Zurich airport? Which ones are late? How many passengers are on them? How can I help things along? So we'll take a quick look at an app that you can run yourself. So this is my MIX07 page. And I'll click on Zurich Airport. Cross my fingers that the net is happy. It is. So Tim Sneath has a bunch of great applications, a series of some great WPF applications, and this was posted up there. And he's got a link to many of them that you can go try out for real. So this is an example of a XAML browser application, a browser-hosted application experience. I'm going out over the internet, downloading an application which includes assemblies and other files and things like that, executing it. Now, this one I happen to have running before, so it just had to do a quick check. This one is normally around 5 meg. It doesn't need to be that large, but that's what they posted. They posted a lot of data in there as well. So here's my plane. And I can see that it's mostly full. It's like 3/4 full. And I can see a lot of data about that. I can change the, I'm not working with live data right now, but I can change the playback time. And we'll zoom these guys a little faster. I can also go watch all these planes that are over in the gates and see them filling up. So I can see if they're there. I can see what time they're going to go off. I can see their visual. I can see all the data about them. So there's really something. There's a bunch of people building great applications where they're taking vectors to render data. They have a tiling system to allow different zoom perspectives, much like Virtual Earth, et cetera. And they're building some great applications. So if you have any real-world flat surface that has things represented in it, 2D is a great place to go represent some data and use color, use shapes, use other interaction to convey information. So when you build applications, one of the toughest things now about things is you can't rely on everybody having 1,000 by 800 screens or whatever. You can't even rely on everybody having a landscape screen versus a portrait screen with tablets and things like that. People have small devices, people have large devices. We have panels and layout to help make it so you can build UI that's adapting to the size that your user wants to see your content in. And it also adapts your UI to the content. The content should have the biggest say in what actually gets displayed. So we have two main concepts. We have something called decorators and panels. Those are two major families. Decorators are things like viewbox and border. Panels are things like canvas and stack panel and grid that you saw a little bit of already. So we'll dive in and learn a little bit more about panels. So I'll jump back to Type Explorer. And I'll click on border and then jump over to decorator. So decorator is a framework element. Framework element is a subclass of UI element, and those are most of our controls, our panels, our shapes, all those things are UI elements, framework elements. There's not really much derived from UI element except framework element. This is where our assemblies are kind of put together. Presentation core has UI element. Presentation framework.dll has framework element. And inside of UI element, we've defined layout, input, focus, and eventing, life. And framework element builds on top of that with many other framework things that we didn't want to put at the lower level. So decorator is interesting. It holds one child, and it must be a UI element. And the interesting decorators, oops. So when you see me moving the slider, I've got a data binding between the slider value and a property on this uniform grid over here. So this is actually a panel that I'll talk about in a little bit. And so I'm just adjusting because my algorithm isn't always picking the right size or number of rows and columns. So we use border, we use viewbox a lot. And then we also have panels, and panels hold multiple UI elements. We have canvas that does absolute positioning. We have dock panel that docks things to the left, top, right, bottom. We have grid that allows you to take UI. Actually, this whole layout's done with a grid. And let me clear the screen, and I'll kind of show you where the grid is here. You define rows and columns. I've got a row here. I've got a column here. And I've got a column here. This element here in the bottom left, I span across two columns, and I leave in just one row. I assign it to the second row, the 0, 1, 2 row, the third row, because the toolbar is one row as well. So I guess I missed one line. Up here, this guy's row 1, column 1, span of 0 for one column for each. And then this guy over here, I have an embedded uniform grid element that does uniform sizing of rows and columns, and that's another panel. And it spans across both rows. So with panels, you're able to do lots of nesting. And with this grid panel, I'm able to have nice sizing characteristics. So panels are nestable. We had dock panel, we had grid. Stack panel, you'll see in a little bit. You stack things on top of each other. Tab panel, toolbar, overflow panel, and virtualizing panel I'll just skip for now. Uniform grid is this thing on the right that does a fixed set of rows and columns and just wraps the children there. And wrap panel does wrapping vertically or horizontally of all your children. So I'm going to go into Blend. And I want to start from scratch here. I didn't like the art from the designer. And inside of Blend, I'm going to start with a canvas. So I'll go over here where all the panels are. I'll draw a canvas. I'll press Control-0 to zoom in to that. You can also press Tab key to go full screen, and then you can press Control-0 again. Or you can press Tab again and Control-0, and Control- and plus work as well. Read the help a little bit, learn those navigation things. So we have a canvas. Now what I'd like to do is, inside of this, Actually, you know what? I made a mistake. That canvas is supposed to be something else. I can right-click on it and just say change it to a grid, which is nice. I don't need to go into markup. I can go into markup. I could delete it and add something. So I'll have a grid. Now I'm going to use one of these custom controls called hand-drawn border and drag and drop it in here. In the hand-drawn border, right now we need to do a better job between blend and it. I need to go set manually the border thickness. So I set the border thickness. I set the border brush to a solid color. And there I've got my border. Now inside of blend, you have yellow around whatever element is currently selected. So I can double click on hand-drawn border and it's yellow over here in this objects and timeline pane. And inside of there, I want to add an element. So I'll double click, well, I'll go choose these text elements. I'm going to choose a text block. Text block renders text, and it can do multiple formats and multiple lines. I'll drop that in, and now I've got a text block inside of this. Now the nice thing you can do with borders and things is you can make them auto size. So down here in the layout pane, instead of having a hard-coded width and height, I can auto-size these guys. So auto-size this guy, I'll auto-size that guy, and now the text block, the content of the text block is controlling the size of this thing. So I'll say element, and I'll change it to framework element, and it resizes, and that's great. Inside this grid, I want to arrange this element so it's aligned along the, I'll get rid of my margin. We've got margin controls in the bottom right here. Whoops. And you can spill negative, you can do negative margins, which is handy sometimes. And sometimes double clicking and just typing 0 is better. There we go. So here's framework element. That's great. I want to change a little bit about that. I'll change the, I'll change the text block. I'll change the margin and make it so I've got some space off to the left. And I'll make equal space to the right, 11 pixels. Now we make it seem like you actually have control over pixels. You don't, just so you know. Pixels are 96th of an inch. We don't let you deal with real pixels. So when we're on different high DPI or low DPI screens, you're okay to just say 5 pixels. You don't need to do anything different. You can say 5 inches, and it'll be 96 times 5 pixels. And so that's a good thing. So here we've got our framework element inside of our grid. Another thing I'm going to do is I'll drop in a stack panel. And what I'm trying to build is the UI for one of these guys. The UI with the content header and the panel and those kind of things. So let's just go build that. I built a stack panel around, actually let me go add a hand-drawn border first. And since it's a pane to format, let me copy that one. So I grabbed a hand-drawn thing. I can right-click, and I can set the current selection. You can drill down or drill up for all the things that are hit testable via the current thing. So I will go select the text block, press the delete key. Inside of this guy, so in order to add something into that hand-drawn border, I'll double-click him, and then I can double-click an element to drop it in. I just dropped a stack panel inside of there. So just going back to markup, we have a grid with a hand-drawn border inside of it with a text block. And then we have another hand-drawn border with a stack panel inside of it right now. Now inside that stack panel, let's add things inside that stack panel. I want to copy one of these guys. Oop. I'll copy one of these guys. I'll go make stack panel active again. I'll paste them in. I'll paste 2 of them in. And then I'll drop 2 text blocks in as well. Because stack panel just changes order of elements, it knows order, and you can go change order. And now I've got 2 text blocks. That's great. These framework elements, I'll go select both of these, or these labels. I'll make them left aligned so they size the content. And then I'll do some negative margins. I'll stick them out there. So it's kind of scary. I'm more of a developer type, but you can build some nice looking things. So here's my stack panel. My stack panel, I'll go change the margin on top a little bit to just move this down a little bit. And then I'll do one more thing with these text blocks. Oops. Double-clicking too many times. Hold on. So I'll take these two text blocks. I'll change the top margins to be 5, the top and bottom to be 5 and 5. And I'll make the left margin good and the other margin good. Now, the great thing about this UI that I'm building, I'm using borders and stack panels that will adjust to the right height based on size. So that means when I'm building real UI over here, if there's no properties over here, let me clear the screen because I've got a lot of drawing. If there's no properties, I don't leave space for them. I could also get rid of the label if I wanted to, but I chose to leave the label. If there's no attached properties, I don't have room, I don't leave space for them right here. The stack panel doesn't have any attached properties. I didn't waste that space. So if you focus on your data and figure out how to visualize those things, using a combination of vector art, layout, which is decorators and panels, and then also and text, simple text, using text panels to have wrapping or not, you can do some great things. Now you'll notice up here in the top left, I'll show you some markup that goes into this now. I'm not going to step through it by hand. I have a dot, dot, dot at the end of this thing. Once I made that text block have a maximum width of 2 inches or whatever it is. And then after that, I was able to go say text trimming equals ellipses. And there's a couple different settings for different ellipses. So there's a lot of different ways you can compose just normal text, layout, vectors to visualize data in a really great way. You go make it data bound. You'll learn how to do that from Kevin. And you can build a very fast application. He critiqued my slides earlier, saying, are they really going to read all that detail about each element and what its content model is? And I thought this would be a better, more visual way to do it, so I started building this on Saturday. And I've been to a bunch of sessions. So it's pretty quick I did already have the data model built for a related project, but pretty powerful way to go build things. So quickly about decorators and panels. You position and size your children. Size the content is really important. You saw the text controlling the size of the border. There's transforms, layout transforms and render transforms. Layout transforms affect the size around you. Render transforms don't. There's opacity on everything, an opacity property from 0 to 1.0. All the children are UI elements, and that just gives you a quick look at some of the elements, some of the built-in panels. Now, the great thing about WPF is our layout system isn't just a bunch of hard-coded ones. We have an extensible layout system where you can plug in and become subclass from panel and take part in, or subclass from a variety of things, subclass from UI element, and you can take advantage of the layout paths and participate in the measure and arrange dance that goes on between all the way down the tree. It's a recursive process. The measure phase where basically a parent says, well, I can't tell you how big I am until I figure out how big my children want to be. How big do you want to be? And then the children say, well, I'd like to be 1 inch by 1 inch. And then later on, there's an arrange phase where the parent says, all right, well, I couldn't give you 1 inch by 1 inch, but I'll give you 1/2 inch by 2 inches. And then given that information, because it may not always be the same that they wanted, the child will tell the parent, well, this is how big I really am going to be, given that you wouldn't give me my cookies for dessert, or whatever. So there's a lot of great examples of panels. Just last week, I started searching the web and trying to collect a little list of panels. Here you see the radial panel that Henry Hahn did in PDC 2005, a fisheye panel that Paul Tallett, I think from Microsoft Consulting in the UK, did. He also did, I forget what you call this thing on the top right, fisheye. Basically, you mouse over it, and it moves aside, kind of like the Yahoo demo and then allows you to click on something. And then here's a timeline view, which was done by some Microsoft PMs, Robbie and Lauren and Phil back in Tech Ed. So I've got pointers to a bunch of those things, and that list will continue to grow robrelia.com, WPF panels. So you already saw some text and text block. I'm going to just quickly go through the sample here in the slides, just showing you 4 different ways you could choose to constrain size of things. So inside of this stack panel, we have a text block that has hello world. There you see that text block, text block has a content model that will allow you to have strings, inline elements, or also UI elements. So you can put strings like hello, and you can put an inline element like span or italic or bold. And then you can also put a button there if you'd like, and it would just weave it right in there. Now this first text block, we're just sizing normally. The other one decides to trim itself with character ellipses, which means it won't trim back to the last word. Word ellipses traps back to the last word. And then text wrapping equals wrap allows you to wrap it. So lots of flexibility here. You can also combine that with maximum width, minimum width, all those types of things. And the layout system plus our text capabilities provides a great capability. At lower levels, if you're writing a text editor, a heavy-duty text editor, we have some really low-level text APIs as well in system.windows.media.text formatting. But this is generally going to be the entry point that most people go at. So how many of you have seen the New York Times reader or the PI reader? Okay, a little over half. I'll start with a demo of how I integrated flow documents into this application. Let me erase. So I'll go to Ink Canvas, and I've got a button up here, hacked together, my beautiful toolbar-based UI. And I've got a Docs button here. And when I click on that, we're going to open up a new navigation window. I'll show you the code for this in a second, and navigate to a XAML document that has flow document at the root. Actually, this document might have a custom control at the root, but wrapping a flow document. But that's irrelevant, really. So we can now go navigate through these different flow documents. What flow documents give you is they give you the ability to have columnized text, pagination. You don't have to scroll. We have a pages down here. We can zoom and see however you'd like. So basically, you get out of the formatting business. You just describe your text and its relative sizes and things like that. And the user is able to have a really rich reading experience. Now, I wouldn't call this phenomenally rich. This document could use a little bit more design. So let me show you examples of 2 different steps that have actually had a little more design. So Ian Griffith, who's a book author for WPF, MVP, and great guy in the WPF community, he built something in 2005, I think, on beta 2 bits called WPF at MSDN. And it uses a web service that MSDN provides to get content. And then he converts that content, I think XHTML content, into a flow document on the fly on the client and then displays that. So I can go want to learn about system.xml.xml document. I press enter. It talks. It thinks. And it builds the documentation straight from MSDN. So that's a pretty cool way. So if you have lots of content, text content, picture content, data content, WPF may be for you because it's a great way to go pull those things together and have great ways to navigate through it. Flow documents are just one example. Now the example that I actually end up using the Seattle PI reader more when I'm traveling than when I'm at home. But there's a bunch of paper news readers, one from the Seattle PI, one from Forbes, the Times reader, and there'll be more over time. In fact, yesterday our team introduced, Kevin Gierstad and team introduced a content starter kit that allows publications to build really professional looking like publications using flow documents. Now most of those guys actually send down RSS to the client, And then on the client, we go through transforms and code to convert it into a flow document and have a great reading experience. But it's not just flow documents. You can go use all of WPF. You can provide navigation to all the different days of the issues. It caches content locally, so when I go away from my internet connection, I can still use it. I can quickly navigate through really high-resolution pictures. I can jump into sports and read about the Mariners winning. They're over 500 now, which is great. And we've got this great columnized experience that even on these wide aspect ratio screens, this really does what you want with your document. Now, there's also an advertising model there. My favorite thing about this actually is just how fast and easy it is as somebody who's just sitting here. You can scroll through, right arrow key goes to the next article, down goes to the next page of the current article. So you're able to quickly fly through a bunch of different articles. So that's a great example of using flow documents, just one of the many components of WPF, one of the many different content families. There's something called XPS documents. They're also referred to as fixed documents. XPS documents are different than the flow documents. Flow documents want to flow and change based on screen size and the real estate that the user gives to the app. XPS documents want to represent what was on the printed page, right? So there's a bunch of different places to go create this. We shipped XPS document as an open specification as part of the XPS community pledge. So basically, other people are free to implement this format, given a few restrictions that are pretty quick to read through. And so we see lots of devices, printers and scanners and other things implementing XPS. But it's a great technology for developers as well, not just for devices. I'm going to go create an XPS document and tell you a little bit about the format. And then some of the goo under the covers as well. I'm actually going to go into Word. I was looking at it lately, and I love how it figures out what you're doing most often. I've been coding a lot. Next most, I've been blogging. Then I do some specs and some presentations, whatever. But I always get afraid if Visual Studio starts bubbling down and PowerPoint and Word go too high. So it's a good way to keep yourself in check and keep real. Hold on. OK. So inside of Word, hello, MIX07. I will do some great formatting and build a gorgeous document. And then I will publish this. I'm sorry, I will save as PDF or XPS. So if I choose XPS, what I get is a zip-based file format. So I'll go to my desktop, hello MIX07.xps, and I can do standard publishing for publishing online and printing or minimum size. And I haven't actually looked through that setting in great depth, but go play with that. I did a blog post comparing sizes of Word docs with XPS, with PDF, and I guess I should have noticed that. So here we go. Here's hello MIX07.xps. It's a zip file, much like Office documents are zip files. I'll double-click it, and there we go. We've got our rendering. Now, interestingly, under the covers there's XAML. Right? So much of the same concepts. We have a glyphs tag, which is low-level primitives of how text is rendered, what characters to use, where they're placed. And we also use paths, some of the shapes that we learned about earlier. So here's an experience. You can go do digital signatures, et cetera. One very interesting thing for developers is you can put extra data in there. Maybe you'd want to package in, because it's a zip file format and you own it, you could put other data in there as well. Send it from one user to the next and have the visible data, and then also have extra data for programs to use. So there's a lot of great scenarios around this Open Packaging Convention file format, OPC, which is now an ECMA standard. If you go to Microsoft.com/XPS, it'll link off to all those things. So I'll copy this and paste and rename to .zip. Yes? And if I open it up, the shell will open it up. You could open it up with PK and zip, whatever you'd like. And inside of here, you see a bunch of different things. I'll dive down to the interesting bits, the XAML bits, and just show you one of these pages. But here we go. We've got a fpage file, which is a fixed page file. I'll drag and drop it out and open that up in Notepad. Oh, or not. Not sure what the issue is there. Sorry, I didn't size this before. Here we go. So we have a fixed page. Now they have a different URI. If you want to go look into the depths of XAML, there's an attribute, a CLR attribute you can sprinkle on your assemblies, an assembly level attribute. It's called XMLNS definition attribute. And you can go build sets of tags yourself. They could be WPF tags, or they could just be other random business objects, or whatever you'd like. And you can give them a nice URI. So that's how XPS works as well. So we've got a height and a width of the page. We've got a canvas inside of it that we've seen before. We've got a render transform. We have these glyphs, which are very readable. Luckily, you have a Unicode string, which makes it somewhat readable. But these guys are basically what character set from the font do I use, and how many pixels do I go move over from the last one. And then in there, if I would have drawn a drawing or something like that, there's also path elements and things like that. So XPS is built on this really small subset of WPF XAML, much like Silverlight has a subset. It's a larger subset than XPS, but we've found some of these tags to be pretty useful. Taking you back to the Type Explorer, when I go to the documents, I can also, let me go get starting with ink. I can also click this print button here, which is custom code, and they've done a print dialog where they've said, this is page 1, this is page 2, what printer do you want to go to, do you want to print? Actually, this is another way you can create XPS content. There's an XPS print driver that's installed with .NET Framework 3.0, and I think there's a down-level version of that as well with the XPS Essentials Pack. Beyond this, there's other programmatic ways to go create XPS documents as well. So you can go through the printer or other ways. But we've got great printing inside of WPF, and the flow and the fixed documents work very nicely together. What this code example does is it takes flow documents and actually goes and prints them out. So I'm actually going to take this opportunity to kind of dive around a few random examples inside of that Type Explorer example, and just show you some code that might be interesting for some different features related to all the different content areas we just talked about. So inside of Visual Studio Orchis, I'm using Beta 1, which shipped in April, very late April. And we've got lots of great XAML support now. The CIDR team is building a WPF designer, which is coming along quite nicely. And they also have built a XAML language service, which is a XAML editor, which uses reflection instead of XSD. So it's able to work with third-party types. So there's lots of great stuff coming inside of VS. Couple of quick things. One thing I do is we implement that. So we've got this button where we say element, all, and children. And that was a bad example to show it with. With panel, there's all the children. There's showing all. And this is just showing the element itself. So the way I did that is I basically had 3 different elements. That uniform grid over on the right, a content control in the bottom left, and a content control up in the top left. And when you choose those different buttons, I change the visibility. The visibility can be hidden, collapsed, or visible. In this case, collapsed is irrelevant. But inside of a stack panel, collapsed, that's how I use the collapse for those text blocks. So I change the visibility here as necessary, and then I call a little helper function here that sets the row span, and the column span. Now notice, this is how you actually set grid.row. Grid.row equals 5 in markup maps to a static method call on grid. So be aware of attached properties and look for grid.setRow instead of looking for a grid.setRow property on the button that you're using, right? So that period should throw you off and say, oh, well, that's something special, and go start there. And you pass in the element you want to set and the value you want to set it to. So when the show all is set, I have them all visible, and I set the rows and columns inside that grid. And when I just want to see the element, I basically put it in row 1, column 0, spanning 2 rows and 3 columns. So very nice, easy way. Because everything is scalable, you can easily do that. You didn't need to do any re-rendering, because I started with vector graphics at the core. All of our elements, all of our controls, our vector graphics. You don't need to worry about scaling, as long as you use the primitives that you should use to go compose these things. So here's a pretty cool feature. I'll demo it in one sec. First, I'll walk through the code. And this is using some of the imaging components. So I wanted to take this great diagram that I was working on, and perhaps the different doodlings that I've done on it. Maybe I'm reviewing some classes or something like that. And I want to create a bitmap. So using render target bitmap, which is in System Windows Media Imaging, I can basically take a snapshot of it, choose different pixel formats. I can choose to render the layout root element. That's the big grid. I use a ping bitmap encoder, and I'll go ahead and add a new frame. And then I'll save it right into a file stream. So with that much code, it's that easy to That's not very nice with the mouse. There's the stylus. All right, so I'll click on copy as bitmap. It's kind of badly named. It's really save as bitmap into random temp directory. But that didn't sound as good. So here's snapshot 07, or snapshot.ping, and there we go. Now, I have the header along the way, the toolbar. If I was to do this again, I would probably just make it so that I've got a grid inside of the grid so that I didn't need to show the toolbar to everybody unless that was important. But it's very easy. This is much like Visual Brush, right? Visual Brush, I can point to a visual. Here, I can point to a visual and snap any sort of artwork. So if you wanted to use data binding to drive a lot of pictures, data-generated pictures, you could go do that and then put them on a website or put them wherever you'd like. Lots of great possibilities here. The imaging guys did a great job. Just one or two more bits of code to show you. So ink canvas. So how do I do the drawing on top? This stuff. So I have this draw button, and it basically hides it or shows it. And I might play, given more than a couple days, I might play with the UI paradigm here. What I do now is I layer the ink canvas on top and stop the ability to do interactivity with any of the things below. So you kind of have to turn off the ink canvas before you click on things. That's kind of annoying. I'd probably want to think through how I want to do that and then code it up that way. So what I do is when I click on that button, these guys right here, these draw, docs, copy as bitmap, draw is a toggle button. And toggle button has an isCheck property, which is a nullable bool. So this is a little bit of a gotcha. First, it's got 3 states, true, false, and no value, indeterminate kind of. And you go say, well, if it has a value, and if the value is true, then go ahead and create a new ink canvas. Create a background that's transparent so I can see the things behind it. Put it in row 1. Put it in row span, row definitions, count -1, so that if I change the UI, it doesn't break. Set the column span to be the total number of columns. And then just go ahead and add it to the layout root, and there we go. And if I wasn't checked already, I go ahead and remove the ink canvas from the layout root children collection, and I set this to null. So that's all it took. There's a lot of other places we can go with ink canvas. You can do interesting things like ink canvas. I think it's editing mode. Editing mode equals select. This is kind of a cool one. And then to do something interesting with that, that's the problem. I shouldn't type XAML in the middle here, huh? Button 1 equals, but you want to. You'll find yourself wanting to do things in XAML. But because markup equals OM, and once you learn the few basic rules, you'll be able to understand how this all works. So you can go to code or markup, and it'll make sense to you eventually. So I've got 2 buttons I set content. I can put strings in there. I can also put a panel in there. That's why it's a content property of type object. Kevin will drill into that. I'll add those to the ink canvas. Ink canvas has a children collection, and I'll add B1. And I'll add B2. See how that works. I'll stop the already running one. I'll go without even debugging, no net, Control F5. So here we go. We'll click on the draw button, and it added these couple of things in there. Here we go. It added those 2 buttons. And I can do kind of a cheap little editor with this selection mode. So an idea I have for this ink canvas inside of here, maybe it'd be interesting to have a free-form tool where I have an ink canvas where I could go say, oh, give me a button class. Poof, and it puts out one of these things. And give me one of these, poof, and it puts it out there. And I can go move them around and do a little drawing and do this nice little rendering. So all these different types of content come together, and there's really a lot of functionality, very deep platform underneath all of these things. So you saw the Seattle PI reader. You saw Word 2007 saving as XPS. I'm actually going to quickly just talk to text editing because I don't have enough time to give it justice. Text editing, there's 2 major components, text box and rich text box. And both the text box just takes strings and it can be on multiple lines. And rich text box can have rich content. The content model for a rich text box, I'll quickly show you. I'll walk you through the hierarchy of some of the stuff that I didn't do before. So rich text box, its content is a document, of type flow document. And so if I go over to flow document, inside of a flow document has any number of block elements. And block elements include things like paragraphs. Let me change the columns here. Paragraphs, sections, lists, tables. Also block UI container. Now block UI container is interesting. Block UI container, whoops, I'm still in selection mode. Block UI container is actually kind of a transition element. It allows you to put a UI element inside of this world. So if I wanted a button, a panel, any sort of controls, that's the transition element I would use to be able to do that. Now paragraph, if I look at paragraph, it's a similar content model to text block that I mentioned before. It has an inlines property, which can contain an inline element like bold, italic, span. It can hold UI elements directly or strings as well. So let me just quickly go over and show you inlines. And inlines are basically, here's all the children of inlines. anchored block, run, span, inline UI container, and line break. So that's kind of the content model for a flow document. Flow documents have blocks, like paragraphs and sections. Inside of those, you can have inlines and strings and UI elements as well. So if you want to edit, so if you want to build a flow document, you can build a flow document and view it using Flow Document Viewer and those kind of things. If you want to edit it, you can use Rich Text Box to edit those things. So you already saw the native ink support. Tablet support's built into all of our controls. Ink support's built into all of our controls. And also Ink Canvas is a great way for you to go ahead and use ink in your application. So WPF is providing a rich set of, a deep set of platform components. The integration across all these different content families will help make it so that if you have great content to display, whether it's newspaper content, content about class hierarchy, content about genealogy, whatever kind of content you have, WPF is the premier platform to have a fantastic user experience around that content, both in the creation, consuming, and annotating all of that content as well. Kevin, in a few moments, will go deeply into control models and where developers can go shine. I pretty much showed you, given the existing components, this is how you can go plug this in. And I talked a little bit about custom panels and things like that. He's going to go dive into data binding, dive into some other things, show a great visualization in 3D, and some other things. So it should be a very interesting talk that you should learn a lot at. So my call to action, before we get to questions, is go build some great, easy-to-run, rich Windows apps. Integrate them with the desktop or the browser, IE 6 or later today, Firefox coming soon on Windows, and really take advantage of a great platform for your content. And one of the great things that we can talk about now is you're able to leverage your skills, .NET, XAML, and knowledge about system.windows namespaces, both across WPF and Silverlight. So whether you're targeting total reach solutions or very experience-first solutions, you're able to leverage that common set of skills. So hopefully you'll find value to both WPF and Silverlight. Please make sure to fill out your evaluation. I'd love to, and also please comment on my blog and ask more questions up there. And I'd be happy to take extra questions right now as well. Why don't you go to the microphones because we're taping, and then I'll stay up here afterwards as well. We have a few minutes. Yes? Yeah,
you mentioned that Type Explorer that you built.
Yeah.
It might become available sometime soon.
So, you liked it?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. What would be good? This weekend would be good. You know, unfortunately, the component I built, the data model I built on top of, I can't release quickly. So I need to think through that problem. But I hope to ship that very soon. I'll post it up on robrelia.com or my blog. So yes, within the next few weeks, I hope to have that posted, and I'll probably make it so you can browse WPF types and also Silverlight types, and so it should be useful. Watch out for feature creep. Yes, I'll try to keep it tight. Yes.
Yeah. Earlier you mentioned that there were different converters you can get to convert from Illustrator to XAML.
Yeah.
I know in the beta of Expression Blend there was an import from Illustrator feature. Does that not work?
You know, I'll have to follow up. In Blend or in Design?
I think in Blend.
I'll check into that and I'll put it up on my event page.
I saw it on the menu. I never tried it.
Okay.
But
yeah.
Our designer is using Illustrator, so we'll need to know what we need to get.
Right. If you go to that page, I linked to Mike Swanson's page that lists a bunch of converters. So start there, and we need to build better comprehensive information about all the converters and tools and where you can get import and export stuff. So thanks for the question. Yes?
If I say font embedding, what would you respond?
Do we do font embedding?
Do we do font embedding?
Yes, we do font embedding, both in XPS documents and in applications. So for instance, New York Times application embeds their fonts into the application, and so you're able to do that. And the Windows SDK has 6 or 7 different fonts, maybe a few more, that you can embed, that you're licensed to embed in your applications if you choose to. So that allows you to build fonts into your application instead of relying on an MSI to install into system Windows fonts. So it's a good thing. So yeah, it's having great text, having vector graphics, those kind of things which make it possible for you to build lighter weight applications that look better. So thanks. Oh, sorry, go over there.
You mentioned Flow and XPS and the custom kind of printing. I'm curious, is there a model, a pattern, advice for those applications that want to be able to flow in an interactive environment, but also be able to print fixed? What's the right model to be programming to?
So this example that I did here basically takes that flow content and sizes it to 8.5 by 11 and then prints it. So my event page links off to the SDK viewer sample inside of our SDK, and that I just stole their code. So you could start there and see how you could use flow within, then lay it out in a fixed size and just call print on that. So go steal the code. Yes?
Recently I worked on a demo using WPF, and one of the issues I had to deal with was our designer was producing the graphics in Illustrator. I was importing them into Design to get to the XAML version of it.
So there is an importer in Design then?
Yeah, you can import an Illustrator file into a blank Design file, and then you can export it out as
XAML?
As XAML, as whatever, Silverlight
or
whatever.
Yeah.
And I would open, if you click the XAML, you can see the XAML that it's going to export right away, copy and paste into Blend.
Sure.
So I was doing that to get the colors for the gradients and everything in the Illustrator files. The problem that I noticed was a difference in color space between Blend and Design. And
but no, you didn't just say between Blend and Design, did you?
Yeah.
Ooh.
There's a total...
I thought you were going to say Illustrator and us, and I could imagine that.
Inside Blend, if you copy the hex value and paste it in from Design, if you copy a XAML hex value and paste it into Blend, the colors don't match.
Like red?
Yeah, like a red or a blue or whatever.
Have you tried this version?
No, but that
okay. Well, I'll follow up with the Blend and Design team.
Definitely, because Blend is using SCRGB, and Design was apparently still using sRGB.
Okay.
Or something like that.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, thanks for the feedback, Kevin. Feel free to come set up while. Yes. Any more questions? Yes.
Story with respect to XPS on small form factor devices. When will I be able to print something on my PC to an XPS and then view it on like a Pocket PC?
Good question. I don't know when XPS viewers are coming for for Pocket PCs, not Power PCs. Anybody could go license the right to go build a viewer, but I don't know whether we've announced any specific plans for those things. Now, interestingly, Silverlight does can render glyphs and paths and much of XPS. So you can imagine Silverlight being useful in some cases to go render some of those things. So I think if you look forward, it's likely that scenario is quite supported. But I can't give you a current time frame. Right? Okay. All right. Well, thanks. I'll let Kevin get back up here. Thanks. I'll be up here afterwards if you have any more questions.